Michael Staab, and first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your afternoon to listening to this webinar, and hopefully we can provide you with some useful information for 2018 and beyond. What we wanted to do is we know this is the time of year into January 1st of February when people are thinking about making possible changes yet for this year or even into 2019. So we just wanted to kind of go through some things with you today, and if you have any questions, as Kim said, you can certainly try to ask them on the screen, and we'll try to answer them for you as we go along, or we'll answer them after the webinar. If you want to email us, we can certainly do it that way. The first slide really kind of talks about the changing landscape, the PBM landscape, and what it means for 2018. I'm sure most everybody has been reading in the press about all, what has occurred with all the different acquisitions and mergers that have taken place, and we've listed several of them here. And one that I didn't, that is probably the most prevalent, is the one with Amazon looking at getting into the pharmacy space. And then in the last couple of days, there was an announcement by Citibank, Berkshire Hathaway, and Amazon about what they may try to do with respect to creating a health insurance company, and whether or not that may involve, pharmacy remains to be seen. But there's just been a lot of activity in the last 6 months regarding the PBM space. The big one, of course, besides the Amazon announcement, was CVS Health announced that they were purchasing Aetna for $69 billion to create a retail pharmacy, PBM, and health plan conglomerate, behemoth, whatever you want to call it. And I think that part of this was in response to Amazon looking at getting into the pharmacy space, but also I think a lot of it has to do with the response to United Healthcare and Optum and what they've been able to do. And really, once you have the CVS Aetna merger completed, which I think is supposed to be at the end of this quarter, maybe the end of the second quarter of this year, you're going to have a retail pharmacy, a mail order pharmacy, PBM, and a health plan. So there's a lot of synergies between those different entities that certainly I think that CVS Caremark will try to bring to its clients. In a smaller transaction, Diplomat Specialty Pharmacy went out and acquired a couple of smaller PBMs called MPS and LDI. A lot of that, in my opinion, was probably driven by the fact that most clients are now going exclusive specialty with their PBM, and if you have Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optum, they control about 80-85% of the specialty market, and I think a lot of specialty pharmacies have been getting squeezed, particularly if there have been kind of carve-out or independent specialty pharmacies. And I think Diplomat possibly saw that as a reason why they should acquire smaller PBMs to try to be relevant as a specialty pharmacy in this space. So I think that they're still going to be a small PBM, but at least they're trying to make get some traction in the market. Kind of an interesting transaction that the Express Scripts made this last year was the acquisition of eviCore, which is a evidence-based medical management company. I mean, right now, as Express Scripts remains the only standalone bricks-and-mortar PBM out there, and I think that what they're trying to do through the acquisition of eviCore is trying to bring more value to their clients with respect to providing evidence about whether or not particular prescription drugs work, and I think that trying to bring solutions if they don't. And we'll kind of talk about a little bit more around value-based contracting later in the webinar, but I think that Express Scripts is trying to move in the direction of trying to provide clients with some evidence-based documentation to show that, yes, this drug works, or no, this drug doesn't work, and what can clients or what can members do to be more compliant. Walgreens, it was kind of on again, off again, based upon what the FTC would or would not allow with respect to the Walgreens Rite Aid merger. Eventually, the FTC allowed Walgreens to buy some of the Rite Aid pharmacies, primarily in the East Coast, where there would not be, where there still be competition, but even after buying some of these pharmacies, these Rite Aid pharmacies, Walgreens, closed about 600 of those Rite Aids, and that may have implications, particularly, for those people who have been getting their maintenance drugs at a Rite Aid pharmacy. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact that the closure of certain Rite Aid pharmacies will have, and also the acquisition by Walgreens has as well. And earlier of last year, in 2017, Walgreens and Prime Therapeutics kind of created this joint venture with respect to smell and specialty pharmacy to try to be more competitive in the market. And then last but not least, Anthem, starting in 2020, and then we'll start their PBM again called IngenioRx, and that was in response to the litigation they had filed against ESI. Their contract with ESI terms of or Express Scripts terms at the end of 2019, and they were looking at getting back into the PBM space to try to bring better pricing value to their clients. So there's just a lot that's been going on, and I think that even in 2018 and 2019, I would expect that there's probably going to be more movement in the PBM space, and it's one of those things I think that you just need to be aware of and kind of monitor what's going on. I do think that because of this, the changes in the PBM marketplace, now is really the time to kind of look at your PBM contract and look at the pricing that you may have with respect to your PBM. In our opinion, based upon the changes that have occurred in 2017, we think that it is certainly now is the time to look at doing a market check. If you have a market check provision in your current PBM contract that allows you to go out to bid to see if there's better pricing in the market, particularly if there's an opportunity to improve your retail mail, especially discounts or rebates, is really something you should do, because otherwise I think that you could be leaving money on the table with all these changes that have been taking place. And even if you don't, and we have seen a number of PBM contracts that clients have that do not even have a market check provision in their PBM contract, and unless you signed a new contract that started on 1/1 of this year, I would certainly encourage you to look at your contract, and if you don't have a market check provision, at least talking to your PBM about the possibility of improving or seeing if you can get better pricing. I think even if you don't have a market check pricing, I think that provision in your contract, I think that PBMs would be willing to entertain, looking at what the possibility would be of improving pricing for a particular client. They don't want to lose a client. They don't want to make a client upset. And I think that if there's a way that you could certainly negotiate that for the third year of your contract, I think it would be very important. If you don't have a market check provision, and if this year you're going out to bid, and you're looking at renegotiating your PBM contract for 1/1/2019, I would strongly encourage you to make sure that you do have a market check provision in that contract. Because like I said, with the changes that are taking place, it's just really important that you have the ability and the flexibility to improve your pricing if that opportunity arises. But the main thing is in the market check language, what you don't want to do is you don't want to have language that basically compares yourself against yourself, because if you do that, and that's the language you agree to, chances are you're not going to get the pricing that you should be getting. Really what you want to do with respect to a market check RFP, it really should be no different than any RFP that you issue when you go out to bid for PBM services. I mean, it's really no different, except for the fact that you're looking more at the pricing terms and conditions and trying to see what you can do. So I do think it's worth your time and effort to see if you can improve your pricing by doing a market check RFP this year, or at least asking your PBM if they'd be willing to discuss with you the ability to change your current pricing.
And this is Greg Madsen. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about kind of some plan design and things that are going on this year for 2018. We've got the trends. And this year, is similar to last year, it's really going to be all about the generics. Each 1% increase in your generic utilization will save you about 2.5% on your overall prescription drug costs. So as these generics continue to grow and you get more and more utilization of the generics, your overall cost will come down, and that takes into account the lack of rebates that you're going to miss as well. So it's really pretty important to keep driving that generic utilization and get that higher and higher. This year in 2018, there's going to be a couple of quite a few large drugs that are actually going to lose patent protection. I listed Levitra and Lyrica, Symbicort, Xolair, and if most of you'll notice, you start seeing ads for these on TV now, right? There's ads for Symbicort, there's ads for these, different things going on. What the manufacturers are trying to do is to get you to continue to take them. You always notice at the end of them, those comments about if you can't afford it, they could help you with your costs, right? So they're trying to keep people on their brand drug as they lose patent protection, right? And so there's strategies from an employer perspective that you want to try to put in place that help prevent that from happening, from keeping people on these brand drugs once they've gone generic. This year, for most of you, I'm hoping 85, to 88% of your prescription drugs right now should be generics. I think by the end of this year, most of you should have 90% of your claims coming through will be generic. So that'll really be helpful. It'll help you from a cost perspective. You got to think from a PBM perspective, especially the ones that are on a traditional kind of a spread model scenario. They actually make more money on a generic being filled than they do on a brand being filled, right? So that's kind of this thing that people kind of think that PBMs try to chase rebates and chase high-cost brands. They really don't. They actually make more money when the generic's being filled, so it really aligns everybody's incentives. You, the employer, save money, the PBM makes more money, and the pharmacies actually make more money. From a profit perspective, it's more profitable for the pharmacies to dispense a generic as well. They don't bring in the dollar revenue, but the profit on those generics is much higher. So that's kind of something that kind of aligns the goals all the way across the board for everyone. A key thing, though, is once the brand name drug goes generic, the drug manufacturer no longer pays rebates on those drugs. So depending on your rebate contracts that you have with your PBM, if you're on a pass-through rebate scenario and Symbicort goes generic, all of a sudden AstraZeneca is no longer going to pay rebates on that Symbicort claims. So there's another incentive for you to convert those brand name drugs over to generics as quickly as possible, because you're going to lose the rebates on those once the brand loses its patent and goes generic. But one of the things you got to really kind of watch out for is that in your PBM contract that you have, depending on how they classify, the generics, because sometimes there's generics that, are considered single source generics. There's only one generic in the marketplace. Or there's an authorized generic. Brand manufacturer makes its own generic. And the PBM will say, well, that doesn't qualify for as a generic in our system, or doesn't qualify to be on the MAC list. And sometimes then they'll take those generics and they'll apply them to the brand discount. So essentially they'll buy down their brand discount using generics, and you got to be very careful that doesn't happen. And that's some language you got to be pretty specific to make sure that you know what's in your PBM contract to kind of protect against that. Otherwise, it can really get distorted pretty quickly. So the key thing, though, I think, with regard to all the generic and the generic utilization, is to negotiate a generic effective rate guarantee, which basically says that it takes all the generics into account, the generics that are available from multi-manufacturers, single generics, authorized generics, all those into account, and gives a discount for them. It doesn't allow any of them to be stripped out of that overall guarantee. That way, for sure, based on your utilization, you'll be able to manage your costs more effectively and actually force the PBM to kind of give you the discounts that they've guaranteed up front.
The next slide I want to talk about is about generic drug price inflation, and I think that this is really something you need to kind of pay attention to for 2018, because I think that last year we saw a pretty big spike in increase in generic drugs, and that the expectation is that there will be probably a 15% increase in generic drug pricing for this year. A lot of that is because of inflation, about 9% inflationary trend for this year, but 15% increase in generic drug pricing is pretty expensive, and I think that all of us have been conditioned to think that generics are cheaper, and they are, but there are certain factors that could come into play with respect to your generic pricing and the impact that it has. Part of it is that there are fewer and fewer, especially for some generic drugs have been produced. A lot of companies are just now getting out of the business because they can't make any money because there's just not as great a demand. But what has happened is it shrinks the number of suppliers, the number of manufacturers that make a particular drug, and all at once you're seeing those remaining manufacturers increase the price of their generics. And so I think that the end result is you may have, again, depending upon language in your PBM contract about what is defined as a MAC drug, or how many generics are required to be on the MAC list, so you get MAC list pricing versus non-MAC list pricing, which could be the difference between brand versus generics. And so that's really important. If you have 2 or more, or 3 or more, or 2 or less, depending upon the language that you have, if there are fewer generic manufacturers, what you could find is all at once you've been paying a generic rate, and you could be paying a brand rate for something that you've been paying a generic for. So it's really important to kind of make sure that you understand what impact that these, if these generics are falling off the MAC list or not. And I think, for some generics, I mean, it's really important to work with your PBM. And again, if you don't ask them to do this, they're not going to. But really understanding how many different generics there are in a particular category in a class that you may be able to use that are cheaper from, and from a plan design standpoint, say, hey, look, I'm not going to cover a generic that's $25 when there's one that's $2 or $5. I mean, so it's really understanding, how many different generic drugs in a particular category, and does it make sense to try to, from a plan design standpoint, limit or have different copay structures depending upon whether it's a preferred or a non-preferred generic drug. But I think that, again, monitoring the deletion of the generics from a PBM's MAC list is important. I know in our contracts we ask the PBM to provide a copy of the MAC list to us on a monthly basis, because Greg keeps track of that. He monitors the additions and deletions, to the MAC list and why are they occurring. Again, even if you don't have anything in your contract, you can certainly ask your account manager for a copy of the MAC list that particular PBM has. You're not asking for the pricing, you're just asking for the drugs that are on that MAC list, so you can kind of keep track of what is falling off or being added, and if it's being dropped, why is it being dropped, and asking questions based upon what you're seeing, because it is important to know what is and what is not in a PBM's generic bucket. As Greg talked about, I mean, it's really understanding the impact of single source and authorized generics on your pricing, and also particularly MAC versus non-MAC generics. But what you really want to try to do is avoid having non-MAC generics priced at a brand discount. And unfortunately, there are a lot of clients that we have seen. There are people out there that have language that that's what it allows a PBM to do. I mean, even though it may be an MNO or Y, so Y is a generic, it's being reclassified as a brand based upon the terminology in the contract about what is or is not on the MAC list. So understanding that definition of a MAC and the definition of a MAC list is really important. And as Greg pointed earlier, it's important to negotiate an overall GER for all generics, because that kind of prevents that MAC versus non-MAC disparity when it comes to pricing. As we discussed, or as I mentioned earlier, one thing to look at in working with your PBM is really understand how many generics are in a particular class, because there are literally like 11,000 drugs in the Orange Book. They're not, most of them are generics. I mean, and so if you don't understand, what different generics are available from different manufacturers, and they're all the same. It's just, they may have a different color, they may have a different shape, but at the end of the day, they're the same chemical composition, but they could have a different price. So understanding those price differences within a generic class is extremely important. And that's why we're starting to see some of our clients this year that started looking at doing a preferred and non-preferred generic copay to try to drive, to the lower cost generic as opposed to a higher cost generic. So just something, to think about when it comes to that.
Another thing we're starting to see in 2018 from the copay trend is a lot more co-insurance coming into place, right? The high deductible health plans have been around for a couple of years, but we're actually starting to see a lot more of our clients that were on a traditional kind of 3-tier copay structure actually go to more co-insurance. So, Kim, we have a question on here that we'd like to, a poll question that we'd like to have everybody answer to kind of give us a sense of where people are within their copay structures right now. So if you're, kind of what is your current copay structure? Are you on a 2-tier, a 3-tier? 2-tier meaning you have brands and generics. 3-tier meaning you have generics, you have preferred brands and non-preferred brands. A 4th tier is usually where you're adding in like a specialty copay tier on the 4th tier, or you have something other than that, right? If you could just populate that in for us, that'd help us to kind of get a sense of understanding where everybody's at on this. Okay. Yeah, so we're starting to get the, it's kind of evening out here pretty close, right? Everybody's third, and 3-tier, 4-tier, and co-insurance. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Kim. So when you think about the co-insurance, right, as we start to see, there is more and more of a trend to that. The high deductible health plans have always been co-insurance coming into place. Where they have 100% copay until they meet a certain out-of-pocket or a certain deductible. And then it converts over to some other kind of thing, copay structure. But what we're really seeing is more kind of co-insurances with a minimum copay and a maximum copay. So you're starting to see a window that gets put in place with regard to the co-insurance. Because putting in a minimum copay, for example, on generics, it creates what's called a zero balance due claim, where the cost of the drug is less than the member's copay, so that you, the employer, don't pay anything for that claim, right? So that if you're on a straight, co-insurance of 20%, where the member pays 20% and you, the employer, pays 80%, without a minimum, you're always paying 80% of the claim. So, for example, right, if you put in a $15 minimum generic copay, and it's 20%, right? 45 to 50% of all the generic claims will have a cost less than $15. So your cost as the employer will be zero in that situation, right? You won't pay anything for it. The member will pick up the entire cost. Now, a key thing you got to put in place, right, with minimum copays and percentages is that make sure that your members always pay the lowest of their copay, the pharmacy's usual and customary or cash price, or the calculated cost of the claim, what the claim actually pays at. That's really important to put that in place, right? That way your members are never disrupted, and the pharmacy can never say, if you didn't use your card, this will cost you less money. Right? Putting that kind of language in place makes sure that the member always pays the lowest of, they'll never get a better deal by not using their card, and that helps to ensure that you get all the drugs coming through from a clinical perspective, right, to make sure that everything's on the profile. Specialty drugs, what we're starting to see in specialty drugs is that they're either going in the 3rd tier, so the non-preferred brand tier, or in a lot of cases that we saw in our poll, that a lot of you are having a 4th tier where you're putting your specialty into a 4th tier. In a lot of cases, that 4th tier is a percentage because it start to share the cost of that whole specialty drug more effectively. But the key on the specialty stuff with regard to co-insurance, right, is that if you do have minimums and maximums in that 4th tier, most likely that specialty drug is going to pay at that maximum amount. So say you have a $75 minimum and a $250 maximum with a 25% co-insurance in between there, right? So if the cost of the drug is $1,000, 25% of that would be $250. Well, since the average cost of these specialty drugs now is running around $3,500 to $4,000, you're essentially going to have the members all pay at that maximum copay amount. So that's just things that need to get modeled into your copay structures. When you're starting to budget and think, okay, what's it going to cost me to put these maximums in there? You got to start thinking about that and take that into consideration with your budgeting.
Yeah, and just to follow up on a point that Greg made about the lowest issue. I know that there's been a lot of press lately about clawbacks. I know there was something the other night on 60 Minutes about clawback situations, and the reason that occurs is because a lot of clients in their PBM contract only have what we call the lower of. It's the lower of the ingredient cost or the lower of copay, and doesn't really say anything about the UNC, which is in a participant group agreement that a retail pharmacy has with a PBM, there may be language that says, okay, you can't necessarily tell them that your cash price is lower than the member's copay or the discount ingredient cost. So that's why that lowest of language is really important. If you have that lowest of language, then when a member goes into a pharmacy, they would pay the lowest of their copay, the ingredient cost, or the pharmacy's usual and customary price, which is their cash price. So that lowest of language that Greg mentioned is really important to kind of prevent that clawback situation. And it really it protects your members from making sure that they're paying the lowest of price, and even if they are, those claims are then still factored into your discounts in terms of the PBM's pricing performance. So I just wanted to kind of just mention that as an aside. On drug coverage trends, again, exclusionary formularies have been around for the last 5 and 6 years. I think that by and large, from our perspective, most employers and most clients are getting much more comfortable with formulary exclusions and moving to a formulary exclusion as opposed to an open formulary. One, because you get better rebates financially. It's just better for the employer to move to formulary exclusions. And what they have found is that there has not been a whole lot of member noise or a lot of member disruption by moving from an open to a more closed formulary or exclusionary formulary. I think that probably the one area that has the most potential for member noise is on insulins, particularly around Humulin and Humalog, which are manufactured by Eli Lilly, versus Novolin and Novolog, which are manufactured by Novo Nordisk. And that seems to be the area where there's the most potential for an issue with respect to a member. But by and large, if that member cannot, if they're on Humulin and Humalog and they can't tolerate Novolin and Novolog for whatever reason, their doctor says no, they have to remain on that. It's not that they can't get it; they still can. They just have to go through a PA process. But I do think that we just have very, very few clients now that have more of an open formulary, because I just think that it took time. I think what they realized that as a way of managing costs, it's certainly better to at least look at the exclusionary formulary. So again, I think it's important if you don't have an exclusionary formulary right now, it's something to think about doing for even still this year, for 2018. I would ask for your PBM to do a formulary disruption analysis to see what the member impact would be if you did move to an exclusionary formulary. If you don't have pricing in your current PBM contract that addresses what happens if I move to an exclusionary formulary, how will it improve my rebates? It's certainly worth opening that discussion as well.
Yeah, typically going to an exclusionary formulary, the only thing that's impacted would be your rebates, right? You typically don't see your discounts improving at all, but you do see the rebates changing pretty significantly going to that exclusionary formulary.
Excluding high-cost generics, I mean, we kind of alluded to this in one of the prior slides about, again, what can I do? I mean, if once you have a generic drug that has gone up in price, you're going to need to probably move fairly quickly in terms of looking at making a plan design change about excluding, particularly high-cost generics, particularly if there's a generic in the class that may be less expensive. So that's why, it's important to work with your PBM or your account team to find out, having them tell you, within a certain period of time about when those high-cost generics are going to hit your invoices, because if you wait, you're going to be surprised about what those costs will be. And I think that it's just another way for you to kind of manage your spend, is just by making sure that you're aware of when these high-cost generics hit the street, because again, it's your money and you want to try to manage that.
We've worked with a number of PBMs now to kind of develop a list of these high-cost generics. And so that's, for a lot of them, that's actually a list that you can get from them and put into your plan design and just exclude them. So you'll basically no longer cover them from an excluding basis and save the money from a cost perspective, because there are less expensive generics in that same therapeutic class that do essentially the same thing. And so that's really the target here, is to take out these really high cost ones and just leave the lower cost ones in place that in a lot of cases are newer and more clinically effective.
Yeah, I mean, again, because as we pointed out, there's probably a pretty good bet that 88 to 90% of 80% to 90% of your claims this year are going to be generics. It is really worth your time to sit down with your consultant or with your PBM and saying, hey, look, let's look at all the different generics in these classes. What are the discounts? And trying to figure out what is best for you. Because if you take the time now, it will save you money down the road. And like I said, there are a lot of different generics in a class, and they're not all priced the same. They're all a little bit different. They're all priced off of an AWP, but the manufacturer price is a little bit different, and it's work, but it's well worth it. And then the last one that again we're seeing more of this, and maybe your PBM has, but one of the PBMs that several of our clients use, they call it their stupid drug list, because there are certain drugs that are kind of combo drugs, or from a brand or even a generic standpoint, that kind of are combined, but they're more expensive than if you just took the individual drug. And so they've created this list of drugs and the alternative that you could take. So as opposed to taking just one drug, there may be two drugs, and again, the cost is significantly different. So again, understanding what drugs, or combo drugs, whatever, for lack of a better term, are out there, and are there single individual drugs that in combination with being used singularly are less expensive than one drug. And there are a lot out there, and it is surprising. So something to look at there.
One of the biggest trends that you're seeing, I'm sure, last year and then this year for sure going forward, has to do with the member cost share, and what percent of the cost of the claim does the member actually pick up by their copay. And again, that's part of the reason that coinsurance is starting to come into play. Because historically, what you wanted to look at is have on average that the members shared about 20% of the cost, right? So for some generics, the member paid 100% of the cost. But for other drugs, maybe they paid, 18, 20%. For some of the specialty drugs, sometimes they only pay 2 or 3% of the cost. So that's what's becoming the biggest challenge, right, is that as the number of specialty drugs have increased, with the release of Humira and Enbrel and, Tecfidera from MS and all those kind of specialty drugs that are starting to roll out, the member cost share now is down around, for a lot of our clients, 10%, 12%, right? It's gone down just significantly. So the challenge gets to be, where do you set that specialty copay? Right? You want to set the copay at a point where it's not too high, so the member says, I can't afford the drug anymore, and they stop taking it. Because theoretically, right, if it's, for rheumatoid arthritis and you can keep them on therapy and it works for them, right, they'll be more productive at work, they won't be sick as often. There's a lot of upside to that whole piece, but you just got to think about, okay, where do I set that at? Because affordability is going to be a huge key to the member compliance, right? You can't set it too high, because then the member's going to say, I just can't afford it, I can't afford to take it. So, but knowing that these costs are going to come through on these high-cost specialty drugs, right, it's really important to put in some nice clinical controls in place to help ensure that, the utilization is going to be appropriate. So quantity level limits, only let them get, say a 30-day supply of a specialty drug. Rarely do you want someone to ever get more than a 30-day supply. That way, the specialty pharmacy can help manage that utilization, can contact them, say, on day 25 and ask them, how much therapy do you have left? Hopefully they have 5 days of therapy left, right? And the specialty pharmacy can send out another 30-day supply to them. If they tell them they have 10 or 15-day supply left, then the question becomes why, right? Are you having side effects that you don't like? Has the doctor switched you off it? Kind of help manage through to keep that utilization proper. That's why it's really key to keep that quantity level limits really at a 30-day supply. Step therapies are also a really important thing to put in place. So instead of giving them this brand new specialty drug, that's this Cadillac out there, to put in a step therapy, to have them try one of the older effective medications first before they get that high-cost drug, right? Make them step through some of the older drugs first to make sure that you know, because they can, in a lot of cases, they'll work and they'll save a tremendous amount of money. And then also put in these therapeutic interchange programs. So when the patient first gets written for a prescription, typically there's, you know, in the rheumatoid arthritis categories, there are a number of drugs that are out there, some of which are less expensive than others. So there's a way on this naive fill, so really the first time they've ever been prescribed it, that's what that means, have your specialty pharmacy say, is there a less expensive drug that we could start them on and see if that one works for them, because if it does, in the long run, you'll save money, right? If it doesn't work, you know, maybe they do need to progress to the more expensive. But again, it's just a way to try to manage that utilization through some of the clinical controls.
One of the areas that really has drawn a lot of interest in the last year have really been in the area of especially manufactured coupons, which have been out there for a while, and some PBMs have been much better than others in terms of helping their clients take advantage of the special manufacturer coupons to help them lower their costs. And this is one of the things I think it was surprising to us, you know, the number of clients who were not aware of these coupons that were available and what the impact could be to lowering their costs and what impact it had on the members meeting their out-of-pocket minimums by using these coupons that sometimes employers were just simply not aware. I know we had an annual review with a client last year here in Chicago, a large client of ours that had no idea that these coupons were being used by members basically to subsidize the specialty drug, and then they were using that to meet their out-of-pocket minimum, which out-of-pocket their MOOPs, which meant that the employer then had to start paying for the entire cost of the specialty drug once they met their out-of-pocket maximums. And they were shocked about what that impact would be. And so the question is, well, how do you take advantage of these manufacturer coupons from the employer perspective to help lower their costs? Because allowing these coupons or members use the coupons, it defeats the whole purpose of having a member pay for their out-of-pocket expenses, and how do you account for those? Because I think the expectation of most employers is that, hey, look, whatever you pay out of your pocket is really what should be counted toward your out-of-pocket maximum, and not just because you're getting a $1,000 coupon from somebody and you use it, where you're not paying anything doesn't necessarily mean that should be, you know, attributed to your MOOP. So there have been a lot of different strategies that have been in play in the last year or so. And then we'll talk about one of the responses from one of the manufacturers and what they were trying to do, because they realized what employers in conjunction with PBMs were doing to try to use those coupons to lower their costs. And one of the ways to do that is to really implement a variable copay program. And again, these are things you can still do this year if you want to, if you haven't already done that. Because, and again, it's important to know, you know, whoever your PBM is, it really is important to ask your PBM, you know, how many different specialty drug manufacturers or manufacturers, period, especially or drug manufacturers, have coupons that they are aware of that have the ability to help you lower your costs. There are some, you know, PBMs, they only have like 18 or 20. There are some that have 150. So, you know, it's all over the board in terms of what your PBM, you know, can or cannot do. But their specialty pharmacy should be able to know because they keep track of this. But it's important to understand that. But once you understand what the universe is of manufactured coupons are out there that your employer, that your PBM can help you with respect to lowering costs, you can implement what's called a variable copay program to take advantage of those coupons by setting that variable copay by the amount of that particular coupon. So if you have, like, if there's a $1,000, you know, specialty drug manufacturer coupon out there, you may want to set your variable copay at $975 or whatever you want to set it at to, you know, to take advantage of that coupon, which means that would help cover the cost of that drug. But the main thing is really trying to make sure that whatever that coupon is being used by the member, that only that portion that they're paying out of pocket actually gets attributed to their out-of-pocket maximums. Because if they use the coupon, you shouldn't have to pay for or accelerate your obligation to pay once they've hit that move. So that's really kind of a key factor. It was interesting at the end of last year, Amgen, who makes Enbrel, saw that, hey, wait a second, what employers and PBMs are doing are really trying to defeat the purpose of developing market share, and they didn't like what they saw, because all at once the employers were taking advantage of this, and they were putting restrictions, on a member's ability to be able to use coupons to cover their out-of-pocket for their out-of-pocket maximums. So Amgen then said, hey, look, you've got to tell us, if you've got this out-of-pocket maximum program, that if a member uses a coupon but they only pay $15, that only $15 is going to apply to their out-of-pocket, as opposed to $1,000 or whatever our coupon is. And so it's been interesting to see the response. I know from our clients who and everybody, if you have patients that have rheumatoid arthritis, chances are you've got Enbrel and you've got Humira is probably your top two drugs. Humira is made by AbbVie, which has a $1,000 coupon, and Enbrel is made by Amgen, which also has a pretty hefty coupon. But what they were trying to do is saying, oh, well, okay, well, if you've got this program, employer, where a member can't use this whole amount to help basically accelerate through their MOOP, then we're not going to cover it. It's not going to be available. And so we told clients, from our standpoint, the plan design information that you have with respect to how you treat these coupons as it relates to MOOP is a plan design issue, which is confidential and proprietary, and there's no reason for you to tell them what your plan design is with respect to their specially manufactured coupon. Because what they're trying to do is kind of create this little database of employers. So I think that.
So Tim, we have a poll question for this. So can you pull up the poll question and?
So the question is have you or are you planning to release your plan design information to Amgen on how you handle out-of-pocket adjustments if a member uses a specially manufactured coupon? Okay, so most of you are no, unsure. Thank God nobody said yes, because I'm sure Andrew will not be happy to hear that. But I think this is, the question is whether or not other manufacturers are going to follow suit. And so far we haven't seen anything from other pharmaceutical manufacturers. Quite frankly, I mean, to me, it's like, why don't you just lower the cost of drug, or why don't you give the coupon to the manufacturer or to the employer to help lower the cost if you're trying to develop market share, in your particular product. But it'll be interesting to see. I think it's, this is one of those areas that you really need to kind of stay attuned to, because I think that there could be changes probably, sometime this year with respect to, especially drug manufacturer coupons. And again, these coupons are different than copay assistance programs, which are more need-based, which we're not talking about that here. We're talking about, or coupons you find in People magazine. These are specific coupons for specialty drugs.
Another trend that we're starting to see kind of coming back into vogue is kind of a restricted pharmacy network options. The restricted pharmacy networks has been around for a long time, 15 plus years. And typically the restricted networks, they'll either exclude Walgreens or they'll exclude CVS, right? And so, and in exchange for that, right, you get a better discount, and typically it's a better discount on your brand rate. So a lot of times, the PBMs will give you a 1% discount, better discount on your brand rates if you exclude either CVS or Walgreens from your network, right? Well, Walgreens acquired all those Rite Aid stores, right? So if you currently have a network that excludes Walgreens, and all of a sudden they buy all these Rite Aids, and they convert those Rite Aids to Walgreens, all those Rite Aids are going to get excluded from your networks as well. So if that starts to happen, you seriously got to think about, okay, what kind of deal can I renegotiate? Because there's going to be a lot of disruption going on with all those things, and members are going to have to move if those Rite Aid stores become Walgreens. Now, a key thing, though, these restricted networks are really limited to ERISA plans, and I suspect most of you on the call here today are ERISA plans. So any willing provider statutes within the states, you'll be preempted from that. You won't be subject to them, which is kind of good. But if you're, kind of a health plan or a Blue Cross Blue Shield, you can't do these restricted networks because you're subject to the any willing provider states that the various states have. Again, I talk about this 1% improvement in the brand discounts, right? You typically don't get any improvement in your generics, you don't get any improvement in your mail discounts. It's just kind of a 1% improvement in your retail. So you really got to think about, is that worth it to me, right? To do this restricted network? Am I really going to save enough money to justify the potential disruption of moving my members? Granted, there's plenty of pharmacies, and typically there's one across the street from each other, but it's really just about, you got to evaluate whether or not it makes sense to do it and whether or not it's cost advantage at all. The other thing we're trying to see, there's a lot more 90-day networks coming into place as well. So, the mail order's been around for a long time, right? And open 90-day networks have been around a while, where you can kind of go to any pharmacy and get a 90-day supply. And CVS Caremark really kind of created this maintenance choice network when they merged with CVS, when Caremark and CVS merged together, right? That really allowed the members, your members, to get the mail order pricing, their mail order copays and discounts at a CVS pharmacy, which was pretty significant in the marketplace, right? And how all that worked and the changes that it caused. Walgreens saw a pretty significant market share loss when that got put into place, right? Because if you're going to get your maintenance medication at your CVS, you might as well get all of your medications at a CVS. So it really saw a lot of market share movement. So Walgreens started to introduce a competitive product to that, which they called their Walgreens 90 program, which was really this counter to maintenance choice. And they've gone out and worked with Express Scripts and OptumRx and Envision and Prime really to offer this Walgreens program. And now CVS has kind of countered that as well, right? So CVS has got a 90-day supply program with Optum and Express Scripts as well. So it's really kind of created more of a competition between these two going on. But one of the key things you got to think about, if you do one of these kind of maintenance choice type 90-day networks where you're restricting all your maintenance into certain pharmacies, you got to make sure that it's really a voluntary benefit as opposed to a mandatory benefit. And what I mean by that is years ago PBMs used to do mandatory mail order benefits that would say you can get 2 fills at retail, and on the 3rd fill of a maintenance medication, it has to go into mail. You have to get a 90-day supply at mail order. That's considered a mandatory mail benefit, right? And typically those are pretty tough to swallow. So if you can really negotiate with your PBM to do one of these, CVS 90, Walgreens 90 kind of programs, but do it on a voluntary basis. So if your members want to get a 90-day supply, they can, but they have to do it at CVS or they have to do it at Walgreens, right? But they're not mandated to do that because from a copay perspective, if your copays aren't aligned properly, you don't have at least 2.5 times your retail copay for a 90-day supply or mail order, it's going to cost you money. The discounts won't be significant enough to offset that amount of copay that you're going to absorb. So it's really key to think about how your copays are structured before you introduce these kind of programs as well.
I'm not going to, we only have about 10 minutes. We still got quite a few areas to cover, but I'm just going to touch on specialty drugs. I think everybody understands and knows how quickly specialty drugs are increasing in utilization, increasing in cost, and what can you do to kind of manage the specialty drug trend. The reality is there are a lot of specialty drugs in the pipeline, and I think that the biggest thing we are asked by our clients is, well, we have to cover all these drugs because they can range anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 a year. And I think that part of what you need to do is really kind of evaluate, when do you cover a specialty drug? Do you cover it, from the time it's available in the market, or do you wait 6 months? Do you wait a year? I mean, we have one client that decided they were going to wait a year before they would cover it. I mean, if somebody really, really needed it and there was a basis for it, there was an opportunity for them to still get it. But I think that, the reality is that there is a drug that's available in the market. There's some manufacturer representative that's detailing that physician, trying to tell them that they should use that drug, and the doctor will use it. And so I think that's one of the things you really kind of have to kind of think about, for this year, is when do I start covering a particular specialty drug? Because I think that that's a real issue. And it was interesting, even in the State of the Union, when President Trump was talking about allowing people to, for experimental purposes for FDA. That's the other thing that I think you're going to need to think about for this year is where do you draw the line with respect to allowing experimental treatment for an FDA drug that may not be approved for particular use? Because, again, I don't know whether that's going to become law this year, but it's something just to kind of keep in mind about, especially as somebody who's responsible for benefits. If somebody wants to use an experimental treatment and you're paying for it, do I pay for it? I mean, it's one of those things you kind of have to think about. But I think that Greg talked about limiting the 30-day supply for specialty drugs. You can look at having preferred and non-preferred specialty copays, particularly as biosimilars are coming to market. We talked a little bit about step therapy. Again, making sure that particular drug is appropriate for the treatment the member is using it for. And because of the cost of specialty drugs, if you're a small or mid-sized employer, one of the things you should really consider is, do I get stop loss for specialty drugs, because they're high cost, and you could have a member that could spend a lot of money for one drug, and it could blow through your budget. So those are certain things to kind of think about from a specialty drug standpoint as you go forward.
A big piece of the value, the cost-saving value of the brand manufacturing drugs are the rebates coming through of it. Right? As I mentioned before, about 90% of your claims this year are going to be generics. 8% will be kind of these traditional brand drugs that you can get at a retail pharmacy, and about 2% will be specialty drugs, either the innovator drug or the biosimilar to it, right? And PBMs are going to negotiate kind of formulary and market share rebates with drug manufacturers, and that's why those exclusionary formularies really drive up the rebates a lot, because that's where the market share piece comes into this. They really can drive market share because they're excluding the competitor from getting the prescription filled, and it really has a significant impact on specialty rebates, right? The rebates on specialty are significant to start with, and if you're doing an exclusionary formulary, we've seen those rebates become really, really high, which really helps to kind of offset the costs of those prescriptions being filled. So in addition to the coupons, you got rebates coming through, and then you got discounts, right? So there's kind of 3 ways to try to get at and help kind of lower the cost besides putting some copays in place. But one of the things we've negotiated with a lot of our drug manufacturers, a lot of the PBMs, is kind of this price protection inflation guarantee rebates, which really puts a cap then on how much the drug manufacturer can raise its average wholesale price on the specialty drugs. So say, for example, they say, with the drug manufacturer, you can raise it 10% this year, and if they raise it 15%, that 5% increase, that difference comes back to you as an employer, right? So that excess of that cap gets rebated back to you to kind of help you, again, try to manage those overall costs. So, but again, the value of specialty rebates are really important, and it's important to negotiate those very aggressively with your PBMs, because there's a lot of money there.
Value-based contracting, again, I think that most clients, and you probably, people on this call are no different than everybody else. It's like, how do I know if this drug is actually working? If I'm paying, a lot of money for this particular drug, how do I know it's of any value? I do think that there, and we've been talking for years now about the importance of linking up your medical data with the pharmacy to make sure that, you can actually prove to yourself that if I'm taking a particular drug that's on a PBM's formulary, that it's working, that it's either reducing admissions, it's the members being compliant, it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. And I think that there is a lot of frustration on the part of employers about knowing whether that particular drug works. And like I said, Express Scripts acquired a company to try to work in that area. I think probably the biggest takeaway in this is trying to work with your health plan this year in terms of, and your PBM, about how can I basically link up my pharmacy with my medical data? How can I use that information, because a lot of clients are data driven, and they just they want to be able to show that if this particular drug is really having an impact on my medical, or if it's not, why am I using it? I mean, even though you have formulary exclusions, at the end of the day, if the drug's not working, then you need to talk to your PBM about what the alternatives are. And if it doesn't work, then I think the question is do you start building into your contract about some kind of clawback language yourself, where if it doesn't work, I get a deeper discount on a particular specialty drug. I know some PBMs have kind of gone to the more value-based in terms of trying to give money back to their clients, but it's just something I think that will be probably something that will be more important in the future.
Kim, we got one last question here for our last slide. So give a sense for the customers and the clients on the call here. Are you really self-insured, or are you fully insured, right? That's kind of one of the key things. It'd be interesting to know, right, of what the listeners here on the call, because it's kind of important when we start talking about third-party administrators here. Oops.
Well, yeah, let's see here. There we go.
No, it didn't come up.
Yeah. Well, again, because we only have a couple of minutes here. The question is if there are small or mid-sized employers on this call, the question is whether you're self-funded or self-insured with a health plan. I think that TPAs, and I think probably there's been movement even in the captive insurance market, which we'll talk just briefly about, especially with what's happened with Obamacare, where smaller and mid-sized employers have realized it's probably cheaper for them to look at doing a carve-out with a TPA or a PBM as opposed to being fully insured. Greg has actually did the math for a couple of our clients, and employers can save between $1,000 and $1,200 per employee per year by doing a carve-out of their pharmacy benefit. And part of that's because health plans utilize the pharmacy benefit to subsidize the medical. So, you're probably overpaying for the pharmacy piece, and by carving it out is important. So it's really important just to kind of look at the pharmacy versus the medical. And the other thing is captives are becoming more important, where really what you're doing, you pay a PEPM or PMPM at the beginning of the year, or whatever you've agreed to at the captive, and then you reconcile at the end of the year. But it's another opportunity where you can kind of combine your medical, pharmacy, dental with the stop-loss coverage and possibly save money in that way.
So this whole captive area really gives you a chance to get a level-funded benefit, kind of like you did with your pre-member per month through the health plan, but it's not insurance, right? So you do get reconciliation and at the end of the year. So I know we're out of time. The last slide really talks about just the key takeaways, right? Ask your PBM for a better price. There's so many things that have happened in the marketplace. Be able to go out and work with your consultant or whatever to negotiate better pricing with your PBM. There are strategies in place to help lower the cost of those generics and manage that utilization of those generic inflations better. Drug manufacturer coupons are significant, right? And take advantage of them, right? But make sure that your members don't get to take advantage of the coupon and have it pay off their out-of-pocket maximum and then subject you to the rest of the costs, right? That's what the drug manufacturers have in mind, is let those coupons pay their out-of-pockets, and so then you get stuck with the entire cost from then on. 90-day retail networks are some pretty viable. Specialty rebates are significant, right? And total cost of care. Just make sure that, and if you are looking to use a TPA to get out of the Blue Cross's of funded benefits, look at some of these TPAs. They've got very competitive pricing out there. They can do your medical and pharmacy together and really help you control your costs. That's definitely a trend we're seeing in the marketplace.
So thank you for your time, and over. We appreciate you staying on the call, and if you have any questions, you can certainly you get our contact information from Kim, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We appreciate it, Greg and Michael. A lot of great information, and thanks audience for staying with us today. Make sure you check out our website for future webinars, and we invite you to join us and Innovative RX at one of our conferences this year. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.